Hello, this is David Parrish, and welcome to the World Missions and Evangelism video blog. Today we're going to continue talking about Matthew chapter 24, and is this the last generation, or could this be the last generation? If you have not seen my previous video, I encourage you to watch it because we took the time to study Matthew chapter 24 a little bit, and we saw that in Matthew 24:34, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." And we begin to talk about the fact that Jesus is talking about the generation that wraps it up, the generation where he comes back. And he says there's going to be a generation when all these things take place. Well, what is that generation? And what are all these things? Well, Matthew 24 is full of signs and things that are going to happen at the very end. But the last sign, the final sign that he gives is verse 14. And Matthew 24:14 says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." So the point of the previous video was that there is coming a generation, there will be a generation that will complete the Great Commission. And the generation that completes the Great Commission will be the final generation. Now the question is, could that generation be your and my generation? Could this be the generation that is the final generation where we complete the Great Commission and where Jesus comes back? Well, the real issue is this the generation that can complete the Great Commission? And what would that mean? What would completing the Great Commission look like? How big a task is remaining in completing the Great Commission? Well, I want to address that for a few minutes today. What he says here is, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, so that's geographically, wherever there are people, as a witness to all nations. The word nations is ethne, panta ta ethne, and ethne means people groups. And this is confirmed in the Great Commission, Matthew 28, where he says, "Go make disciples of all peoples, of all ethne." And in Revelation chapter 7, where it talks about all these ethne, all these people and tongues and languages will be standing before the throne at the end. And so here's the issue that we want to deal with today. How much is remaining to be done to finish the Great Commission? I want to refer you to a report that I have received called The Global Status of Evangelical Christianity. This is a fascinating little, about 5-page report that I received from the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. And they have a website called peoplegroups.org. And I really would encourage you to study and to go on to peoplegroups.org. In my opinion, this is the most cutting-edge research that I'm aware of today. And I love the way they have done research on where are the unreached people groups and how much more needs to be done. So this lesson today on this video is going to be a little bit technical, but I hope you'll stick with me so that we can see how much is left remaining to be done. First of all, I want to introduce you to four categories of people, four categories of people groups that are on the earth today. First of all, there are the reached people groups. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is a reached people group is a group of people, a tribe or an ethnic group or a grouping, a sociological grouping of human beings that has received the gospel, that has received the preaching of the gospel. They have an opportunity. Maybe it's not finished yet. Maybe it's far from finished, but they have an opportunity. There are people in their people group that are saved, that have received the gospel, and that have churches, and that these churches are able to multiply. Now, that doesn't mean that their job is done. Those churches still need to multiply. There's still a need for church planting movements among reached peoples. But, of course, they have the opportunity to do that. So there's reached people groups. We might call them RPG. Then there are unreached people groups. Now, unreached people groups means a people group that, or a tribe or a grouping, a sociological grouping of human beings that as of yet have not been adequately reached with the gospel to the extent that they can take it from there. And the way that most missiologists currently define that is that means that less than 2% of that people group have received the gospel in such a way that they have a self-sustaining and self-multiplying church that they can go on and completely reach their own people group. But if less than 2% of people have been reached to that level, we would call that group an unreached people group. All right? And there are many of those still on the earth. We're going to talk about that. So there's the reached people groups, and then there's the unreached people groups. Within the unreached people groups, there's a third category that we would call unengaged, unreached people groups. So there's RPG, reached people groups, UPGs, unreached people groups, and then there's UUPGs, two U's, UUPGs, unengaged, unreached people groups. And what that means is that currently, as I am making this video in July of 2016, that these are people groups that are not being engaged at the present time with mission work that is aimed at bringing them the gospel and planting churches that multiply. So not only are they unreached, but they are unengaged. They are not yet even reached with, no one is even attempting at this time to reach these people groups with the gospel adequately. They are less than 2% reached, and they are unengaged. They are less than 2% reached. They don't have a replicating or an adequately replicating church. And at this present time, there is no mission work adequately engaging them to even cause that to happen. So there's reached people groups, there's unreached people groups, there's unengaged people groups, and then finally, there's what we would call remote unreached people groups. Remote unreached people groups. And what we mean by that is not necessarily geographically remote, although many of them are. We're not talking about Stone Age tribes, although some of these are Stone Age tribes that are still uncontacted by the outside world. Believe it or not, there are still people today in July of 2016 that live in uncontacted, unreached people groups. They don't even know there's an outside modern world. They're still living in the jungle somewhere. There are still a few people that are that way on planet Earth. Not many, but there are still some people groups in that category. But remote unreached people groups not only refers to those in that category, but to those that, although they may be living in a slightly more modern way, they are completely unreached. That is to say, there are absolutely zero Christians among them. There is absolutely none of them that know Jesus Christ, and the gospel has never in any form penetrated to them whatsoever, and they may be walled out by a religious wall or a geopolitical wall. They may be living somewhere in the Middle East. They may be a completely Muslim people group that not a single one of them yet to this day has ever been reached with the gospel. There are still people groups that are what we call remote unreached people groups, RUPG. So there's RPG, they're reached people groups. There's UPG, unreached people groups. Those are people that no one has reached yet. There are UUPGs, those unengaged, unreached people groups. Nobody is even attempting really to reach them yet, and they're unreached. And then within that group, there are RUPGs, remote unreached people groups. These are people that no gospel witness has ever reached, and there are zero Christians among them. Now, this is the categories of human beings on the earth. Now, to complete the Great Commission, we have to reach all of these people with the gospel. There are still reached people groups, yet They still need church planting movements among them. There are unreached people groups. They must all be reached. There are unengaged unreached people groups. They must all be engaged and they must all be reached. And there are remote unreached people groups that have no gospel witness and never have had, and they must all be reached. Now, how many people are in some of these categories? Well, according to this research by the International Mission Board, and this research is current up through the end of March. This is current as of April the 1st, 2016. Here are some statistics that I would like to give to you, and I'm going to round these off a little bit. I have some key numbers here, but I want you to know that there are over 11,000 people groups in the world. In fact, 11,490 people groups in this estimate. Now, of those 11,490 people groups, this is what I want you to understand. I want you to understand that over 6,000 of them are unreached people groups. So about 5,000 people groups are in the reached people groups arena. If you're watching this video, you're in one of those 5,000 people groups. I am in one of those 5,000 people groups. Most of you that are watching this, you are an RPG. You are in a reached people group. If you have rejected Christ, if you have rejected the gospel, it's on you. You have not taken the opportunity to believe the gospel. But most of us that have believed the gospel, we are part of the RPG. We are a reached people group. And of the 11,000 people groups, 5,000 of us are in reached people groups. But listen to this, slightly more than 6,000 of the people groups, more than half of the population of the planet is still in unreached people groups. More than half. Let me break that down for you in terms of numbers of people. There are about 7.2 billion people on planet Earth. About 7.2 billion people as I speak to you in July of 2016. 7.2 billion. 4.2 billion of those 7.2 billion are in unreached people groups. More than half. Of the 7.2 billion people on earth, only 3 billion of us live in reached people groups. I didn't say there were 3 billion born-again Christians, but I'm saying that there may be close to 1 billion born-again Christians. 1 billion. But 3 billion have had a chance to hear the gospel. And about 2 out of 3 have rejected it or have not responded to it yet. But 4.2 billion people live in unreached people groups in July of 2016. Now, of those 4.2 billion, those are the ones we must reach with the gospel. We must reach. For Matthew 24:14 to be fulfilled, those 4.2 billion people must be reached with the gospel. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached as a witness to all peoples. He didn't say all peoples will be saved, all peoples won't be saved, but they will have the opportunity to make a decision. And today, that means 4.2 billion or 6,000 unreached people groups must hear the gospel adequately. That's what it means in July of 2016. Now then, how many of those are in unengaged, unreached people groups? Well, although there are 4.2 billion people in 6,000 unreached people groups, there are somewhere around 2 billion people, somewhere around 2 billion in 3,100 unengaged, unreached people groups. That's right, you heard it here. There are about 3,100 unengaged, unreached people groups. And their population is somewhere around 2 billion, probably a little over 2 billion people, are in unreached people groups where we're not even yet fully attempting. There's no one actually engaging them with the gospel to this day in July of 2016. And then finally, how about the remote unreached people groups? The people groups that they are 0% Christian. Well, there's not a single Christian in that people group. The interesting thing for me to tell you about that is that there's only about 465 people groups that we know of that are absolutely remotely unreached. That is to say, not a single believer ever in those people group of any kind. And the population of those 465 people groups is almost 10 million. Now that, I said million there, not billion. So there are about 10 million, close to 10 million, a little less than 10 million people in remote unreached people groups with 0% Christian. No one from that group has ever heard the gospel, and the gospel in no form has ever reached them. In other words, your Christian television station can't reach them. This video on YouTube can't reach them. All the things that are currently being done can't reach them. We must reach everybody in the unreached people groups, the unengaged unreached people groups, and the remote unreached people groups with the gospel. Now, the target population is 4.2 billion who do not have an adequate access to the gospel of Jesus Christ right now. And before Matthew 24:14 can be fulfilled, those 4.2 billion have to have an opportunity for the gospel to be adequately presented to them. And that's a big, big task. But we don't want to just present the gospel. Jesus didn't just say present the gospel one time in some, video blast. But he said in Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all peoples. He's actually told us, don't just present the gospel so that they'll just hear it once, but they must be engaged in a way that they're able to be made disciples. So that's the question for us today. Is this the final generation? Can we, in this generation, fulfill the Great Commission? There are 4.2 billion people that must be engaged with disciple making for Matthew 24:14 to be fulfilled. It has not been done in the last 1986 years. I'm going to talk about that in the next video. Now, here's the thing I want to leave you with today. I believe that it can be done in our generation. I believe that it can be done in my lifetime. I believe it can be done in your lifetime. But the big question is how? If we have not, it's almost been 2,000 years since Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead and ascended to the Father. It's been almost 2,000 years since then. And we haven't finished the job yet. How could we finish it in just our lifetime? And we're going to be talking about that in the weeks ahead. Thank you for watching. I hope you've learned some great information in this video this week. God bless you.